All right, welcome back to the Agendas podcast. I'm your host, Harry, here with Ben. Ben, what's going on?
Hey, I'm excited.
Oh, we got some exciting stuff going on today. Some more NBA playoffs. We had some pivotal game fives in the NBA. We got some more tonight. We are recording this on the Wednesday before the games, just so you know, in case something happens later and we don't mention it. And then we're going to get into some NBA draft lottery, which going into it, I didn't think was going to be that particularly interesting, but because of the result of the winner of the lottery, I think it sets up some very interesting scenarios potentially. We'll get into that, but we're going to start with some Denver, Minnesota. Denver has stormed back in this series and taken control. That's for sure. Minnesota obviously started up 2-0 in Denver, and game two they blew them out, and it kind of looked like they were. Is Denver going to get swept? That was thrown around. Bill Simmons, he said that Denver's going to get swept, and he's like a massive Nikola Jokic fan, so that was like it was pretty surprising. But the way the series has turned has been kind of unbelievable. I think most people had a feeling after Game Three, once Denver went into Minnesota and blew them out, it kind of felt like, okay, this is the Denver we know. Obviously, they had to win Game Four, and that Game Four kind of came down to, I mean, it was a close game. A pivotal moment in that game people were talking about is before halftime. I think Minnesota was down seven, and it's like, okay, maybe we can get a stop, and then get a score, and we'll be down five going into the half. But it didn't work out like that. I think Denver scored, the Minnesota turned it over, and Denver hit a three, whatever it was, or Jamal Murray had that big half court buzzer beater, and it ended up being a 15-point Denver lead, and that kind of closed out that game. And then last night was the Nikola Jokic show. He embarrassed Rudy Gobert. People are saying, "Oh, Rudy Gobert doesn't deserve his Defensive Player of the Year." I don't know who's stopping Jokic at the end of the day, it's also just like a bad matchup because Jokic can kind of just like bully Gobert, and where Gobert really brings value defensively, it's kind of as like a rim protector in terms of a guard dribbling to the rim, right? He can kind of meet them at the rim, and they're not gonna be able to do much. Or someone goes up soft, he's blocking it out of there. But a player like Nikola Jokic is just he's too big. I don't know if it's necessarily muscle, but he's just a big guy, and he kind of just like bullies him under the rim and puts it up because Jokic has great touch. Um, but this is what we wanted to see. We wanted to see Nikola Jokic, who people are calling the best player in the world, and deservedly so. This year he's trying to defend his championship of last year, and obviously you don't have to win the championship every year. But if he was going to go out in embarrassing fashion, then people are going to start to have some conversations. And this game, pivotal game, 2-2 back in Denver, where Minnesota won both games. He, he's he put on a show. He scored 40 points in total control of the game. Embarrassed the defensive player of the year. Even Anthony Edwards said after the game, he's like, I don't even feel bad. Jokic is the best player of the world, and he kind of did what he did. Let's start. We're going to start with that Nugget side of things, and we'll get to Minnesota side later. But Ben, what were your major takeaways from the Denver side of this game?
Denver side of this game, first half, I actually didn't think the Nuggets played great. Um, Jokic, we talked about Jokic ended up with 40 and he took over. I think that was mostly in the second half. In the first half, he wasn't passive by any means, but I didn't see taking over. Um, he did. First, I did notice the Timberwolves were letting Gobert go one on one with Jokic in the first half, like completely with no help, just one on one, no shading or anything from other defenders, completely leaving the other defenders spread out, and it was just like a joke. Like it was a bucket. It wasn't even. He would shake Gobert so bad it wasn't even contested. Um, so that's. I mean, whatever. I'm not blaming Gobert for that, and you don't take away Defensive Player of the Year because that's not really what Gobert's defense is about. It's rim protection, and then whatever we can get in. We can get into the value, and we might a little bit, when we talk about Alex Zar, the number one pick for the Hawks. But in terms of just the value of rim protection versus as opposed to defender who can one-on-one, shut down people like that. But yeah, really the Nuggets took over in the second half, but really more macro. At this, we talked about Jokic's legacy. Yeah, obviously you don't have to win the championship every year, but in terms of being a great player, but in terms of if he's trying to get into the all-time conversation, he probably needs 3 rings, right? And if he doesn't get it this year, that's starting to get mighty suspect, and that conversation probably needs to slow down. At this point, they kind of have the inevitability of, like, I don't want to say Warriors level, but like until they're down 3-0, you should not be picking against the Nuggets at this point. And
You're
not to say
you're talking about Prime Warriors, right? Prime Warriors.
yeah, not the Celtics Warriors. I mean, whatever. That'll be a conversation for the offseason. Yeah, obviously not. Yeah, we're talking about prime Golden State with Kevin Durant. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about beating the Celtics who choked themselves. Okay, no, I'm sorry. I apologize. Uh, but yeah, I mean, they have the inevitability to them at this point. I thought they had some of it. When they were down 2-0, I was like, they're not definitely losing, but I didn't give them the inevitability. At this point, you can't until they're down 3-0. I don't think you can pick against the Nuggets moving forward.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It feels like at this point of the series, kind of the opposite of how we felt after Game 2, where it's like, oh, everyone's like, Minnesota's winning this series, right? And then now it's kind of like Denver's definitely winning the series, and people forget it's a 3-2 series, and Minnesota's going back home for Game 6. So I'm not writing Minnesota off personally. I don't think Denver's just going to walk in and blow Minnesota out. I could be proven wrong. I just don't see that happening. I see Minnesota putting up some sort of a fight, especially Anthony Edwards, who really struggled in this game. But let's get to that Minnesota side of things.
Well, yeah, I
Before
don't
we
think.
get, go ahead.
No. When Denver was down 2-0, we thought Minnesota was winning. We weren't saying Denver was going to win. We weren't on Denver that much. I'm not giving myself credit, but we didn't think Denver was out of the series. They could win Game 3, and we'll go from there. Minnesota to me is out of the series. I give them a 0% chance to win. Could they win another game? Absolutely. But we'll get into whatever. We're going to get into the Timberwolves now. Anthony Edwards, I do not trust to have 2 great games in a row, and they have no offense like you've been discussing the entire playoffs.
But before we get there, I just want to talk about Jokic. Jokic is already in the all-time conversations, but just to clarify things, what I'm talking about is we talked about, is he the greatest offensive player of all time? And I test wise, I just want to say yes from what I see. Even LeBron James, I mean, LeBron James obviously was more a complete player because of his defense that he brought to the table, first team All NBA level defense. But in terms of consistent every single night, eye test wise, numbers wise, efficiency wise, he just can do it all. And there's kind of teams have tried different things with him, and it takes him a game or two to figure it out. Like I remember a couple years ago, he was playing the Warriors, and they ended up losing that series in 5 games because the team was trash. But Draymond kind of had him struggling a little bit in the first game or two, and then he kind of figured it out. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is Nikola Jokic. He looked like the best player in that series when Golden State went on to win the title, even though they lost in 5 games. He kind of did whatever he wanted to. But in terms of just, there's nothing he can't do offensively. And like I mentioned before, we can argue maybe in the offseason or a different time of let's go through the greatest offensive players in NBA history, just purely offensive. Um, and he's definitely on that list. And like, there's no player I would say is definitively a better offensive player ever than Jokic. There's no player that you can say this player is definitely better than Nikola Jokic all time, offensively. And it's you got to give him a couple more years because he had the championship last year and there's been some injuries and stuff like that. But if it goes on for 2-3 years, it's going to get serious, the conversations. And if he finishes off the championship this year, I think he's probably already in the top 15, and he's going for that top 10. A lot of people have Steph Curry in their top 10. I can't put Nikola Jokic over Steph yet, but I would be shocked if he doesn't get there. I mean, he's already got the 3 MVPs, which is more than Steph. If he wins the title this year, he'll have 2. He'll have 2 Finals MVPs. So he'll pass Steph in that. And I just think the peak is just better than Steph. The numbers, obviously Steph's numbers were never as gaudy because a lot of those games they were blowing their opponents out. But just eye test wise and the way he dominates and the way he can dominate without needing anyone else, meaning in terms of screens or off the way the offense flows or anything like that. It's kind of Nikola Jokic is the offense. So I definitely think he's in those conversations. And people get scared whenever you talk about LeBron James or Michael Jordan, even all time. Someone competing with them as an all time player offensively. But what can he do? Why isn't he in those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. No, in terms of an individual player, just offensively, for sure. But when we talk about the all-time players and not put a specific category on it and just talk about all-time, you got to have 2, 3, 4 championships, and I think that's what we got worried about.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, just because we're saying offensively, he's great. He's one of the greatest players ever, period. You know what I'm saying? It's not like offensively and then defensively he's so negative that it brings him down. It's just he's not. A lot of the all-time great players are also historically great defensive players, and he's not that. He's fine. He is what he is. He got overrated at some points. It was like, oh, Nikola Jokic is actually a really good defender. It's actually he's not a great defender, which is fine to say. I don't know how big of a negative he is. He's fine. He is what he is. But he's definitely in those conversations. Let's move on to the Timberwolves a little bit. Talk about that. Anthony Edwards really struggled in this game, which I know Ben's going to kill him because Ben is the resident Anthony Edwards hater over here on this podcast. Um, I'm not going to kill him too much. I think Game 4, he kind of put in that like, okay, I'm doing whatever I can to win this game, and let's go up 3-1. And he scored 44, 45 points, whatever it was, and then they didn't win that game. And then this game going back to Denver was always going to be a tough matchup. Denver had the momentum going back home, anything like that. I would be shocked if Anthony Edwards didn't put up a great performance in Game 4. Again, we talked about this. Minnesota's offense struggles even when he scores 40 points, 50 points, whatever, 45 points. So when he doesn't, they're kind of screwed. But I would be shocked if he doesn't go back home and dominate. But the conversations did slow down a bit, as they should. They were getting a little too crazy after Game 2. It's people, Michael Jordan. I get it's the play style and whatever it is. It's like, if he wins the championship this year, is he on pace to become this, this, this? Let's relax a little bit. The series ends when the team wins 4 games. But I wouldn't be surprised if he went back home and scored 40 points and forced a Game 7. Obviously, I would pick Denver at this point in the series, and I picked Denver before the series. But Ben, why don't you let us know how big of a disappointment Anthony Edwards is from your perspective?
No, I've changed my mind on Anthony Edwards. I haven't put in a deep thought about it, but non-centers, Anthony Edwards might be the best player in the league today. I mean, you that game that I saw 2 nights ago, 44 points, 64% field goal, it missing a shot, and he was taking every shot and hitting every single shot, particularly in the first half. It was I don't remember a performance like that in my time watching basketball. So that to me was it was cool to see. That to me, number one player on a championship team, and not on a specific team that's built around in a certain way. No, that is a number one player on a championship team. On the other hand, he had 12 points in a playoff game the first series. This game, 3 games ago, 19 points. At least it was 53% shooting. Then he comes back after the best game I've ever seen offensively from a non-center. 18 points on 33%
Whoa,
from
whoa,
the field
whoa,
goal
whoa, whoa,
on
whoa!
only
The
15
best game.
shots
Whoa, 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 whoa! The best game you've ever seen from a non-center.
that I can recall. Yes.
You didn't watch Kevin Durant Game 5 versus the Bucks? Okay, well, that'll be a separate conversation as well.
Okay.
That's an
Okay.
insane
Okay. Okay.
statement, but I hear what you're saying. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, listen, I haven't got, obviously, my memory is my memory. Yeah, the Kevin Durant game's on the table, LeBron James, 51-8-8, whatever, moments and whatever. Whatever, we can have a conversation. This was one of the best performances I've ever seen. It was a championship-level player on any team, not in a nitpicky situation or anything like that. But then he follows it up with 18 points on 33% from the field goal. And he was very passive, particularly in the first half. I don't know what you do with that. So whatever. I'm not trying to do an evaluation of Anthony Edwards at this point, but Anthony Edwards will not be having 2 great games in the next 2 games. Maybe in Game 6 he'll have it, and he won't have it in Game 7 or the other way if there gets to Game 7. But the other problem is when he went for 44 points on 64% of the field goal, they lost the game, Harry. So what do you like? I don't see the path for the Timberwolves to win the game. And it comes back to what you said. They do not have enough offense. They have no offense outside of Anthony Edwards. Unless Jaden McDaniels is going to turn into P.J. Washington, it's just not going to happen.
Which, by the way, he did one game against the Suns. Yeah, again, it's not blaming Anthony Edwards for when he scored 44 points and they lost. It's just kind of they don't have enough offense. And even if he does score 44 points, they also have to be elite defensively. That was their recipe early in the series. And it's hard to predict happening. Like, I kind of hear what Ben's saying in terms of you could see it happening one game but not both. What I will say about Anthony Edwards, even if they lose Game 6, going to this playoffs, I kind of thought he was like a second tier star, kind of like he's a nice player, he's flashy and maybe he'll get there one day, but this playoffs he kind of took it to another level, and I think he's clearly in that top 10, and he's fighting in that top 5. Obviously, we'll talk about Luka in a bit, but people had Luka, Shea, Giannis, whatever, in that top 5, and I think he's definitely in that conversation because he brings it on both sides of the court.
Yeah,
But
that's
Ben,
what I
is there
skipped
anything?
as well. I wanted to touch on that. I noticed this more in the last game than I did in the 44-point game, which obviously you only have so much energy. You can't be doing 30 shots and also defense and whatever. You see him on defensively as well. Certain plays, the guy is he's so quick. He looks like Sonic the Hedgehog, He looks like Sonic the Hedgehog going from one side of the court to the other, following around a ball handler, around screens. He's so quick to get from spot to spot to spot. Like he brings on a defense. He brings on both sides of the ball. Elite. It's the consistency's not there for whatever reason, and hopefully he can find that. And at some point, I'm talking as though the Timberwolves already lost, but at some point we'll do a Timberwolves off-season plan. But
By the way, he's 22 years old. Let's just throw that out
and
there.
he's
But
20.
Ben,
Yeah.
is there, and that's usually something that comes with age, is the consistency. That's the thing with Tatum, is Tatum kind of started out with this type of trajectory. I don't know if he was quite this at a young age, but then it was like, okay, when is he going to take that next level to be consistent? And it just never happened. But Ben, is there anything else you want to add for this game before we move on to Mavs Thunder?
No, let's go.
All right, let's go Mavs Thunder. Game 4 in Dallas. Dallas has a chance to go up 3-1, and Luka kind of pooped the bed. That is what happened at the end of the day. All right. Again, as we mentioned on this podcast, we don't do injury excuses. I don't do it. I just heard about Jalen Brunson. He played bad because his ankle was hurt, and then the next game he scored 44, and nobody talks about an injury. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. It's playoffs. Most people are not healthy. Okay. PJ Washington hit another 5 threes. But again, Luka 6 for 20. I mean, it's embarrassing. He had the 10 assists and a triple double, but 6 for 20 is not going to do it, especially when people are talking about you as a top 5 player. And Kyrie Irving also. I get it. He's impacting the game in other ways. He's a nice presence. He's a nice floor general. He's buying in defensively and all that. But 9 points in a playoff game, 9 points from Kyrie Irving, just embarrassing. Taking 11 shots. That's unacceptable. There's no world where Washington should be taking 19 shots and Kyrie Irving should be taking, 11 shots he took? Or, yeah, 11 shots. It's just, that should not be happening. We talked about this before the playoffs, Ben. I don't know if you remember this, but Kyrie Irving is seen as this great historic playoff performer, and it's not the case. It really isn't. He had that 2016 Finals, game 5, 6, and 7, where he really turned it on. He hit that game winner in game 7, obviously, which we're not poo-pooing. They get the ring, right? No one's taking away his ring. But in terms of Kyrie Irving as a consistent elite playoff performer, it just hasn't been there. We've seen moments. The Clippers in one of those games that the Clippers were up 30. He kind of put on some points in the second half. That was a little bit garbage time-ish, garbage time adjacent, we'll call it. And he's had some other like little flurries. But where's the Kyrie Irving 30-point games? Luka's obviously struggling. It is what it is. Luka's playing horrible. But the whole point of having that second star is, okay, your first star is struggling. Come step up to the plate. And he just didn't do that. Luka had to throw the tie of the game late in the game. He missed it. Again, he's just been overall awful. And then from the Thunder's perspective, we'll get into the perspective in a bit. But Ben, do you have anything to add on or what are your thoughts on the Mavs side of this series and this game in particular?
Yeah, I picked the Mavs to win this series. I am no longer picking the Mavs to win this series. I've switched it over to OKC. The new information I received, I thought these teams were relatively even. I thought the Mavs had the experience advantage, and when we were going to come down to close games, they were going to be the ones who were going to be able to close it out. This game, it was a close game, but watching the game, even when OKC was down by 8 and 7, and they were cutting it a little bit, and then the Mavs would cut it right back. And even the OKC would get it to 3, but watching the game, you felt like they were down, when they cut it to 3, they were down really by 8. Like, it did not feel like, it felt like the Mavs had a stiff arm out on them, like they weren't getting through. And then at the end of the game, it was just bang, 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 and whatever the Mavs force field they had, it just went away. And I thought the Mavs' experience was going to give them the edge in that type of game, and they couldn't, hold that all the way through to the end. I was very impressed with, we'll get into OKC, but very impressive that they were able to keep pushing through. I mean, it was a very physical game. No fouls were being called down the stretch. Offense was tough to come by partly because of what the officiating was allowing. The Thunder were down. Mavs were answering consistently whenever they did get a shot. And, whatever. I'm really talking about OKC right now. I guess to touch on individual players, we'll start with Kyrie because you spent some time there. Yeah, I think flurries is the right word. throughout this playoffs, you've seen Kyrie's really been, a no-show for large stretches of the game. But you will get him often for a quarter, or not even for a quarter, for 5 minutes when the Mavs are struggling, and he'll hit 3 transition threes in a row contested to get them back in the game, or something like that, where it's a flurry, and it's an intense, impressive flurry, valuable flurry, but it's a flurry. So that's not going to get it done. And then touching on Luka, at this point, for me, the Luka narrative, either he gets to the Eastern Conference Finals or he doesn't, so we could talk about the stats. Obviously, he played terrible.
Western Conference.
Western Conference Finals or not, but right, Western Conference. But either he gets there or he doesn't, and it does. I don't think they're going to get there at this point. But obviously played terrible, worse than Anthony Edwards. 18 points on 30% shooting this game. He hasn't had a great game this whole series. 22 points, 29 points, and then 19 points. So he's played bad. At this point, he's James Harden. We've gotten to the big. Listen, he's had some big games and big moments, but he's gets to the biggest games in the playoffs and has not been playing great. People are going to give him the injury excuse, which at this point I don't really care, because at some point after 3-4 years, you give him an excuse this year, excuse that year, eventually adds up and those kind of fade away. We'll see if they can get it done. I'll be impressed. I don't think they're going to do it at this point, getting to the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, I'm not saying there's no Luka is banged up. I'm not saying he's not banged up at all. But again, there's certain players where it's just like the guy plays great, and if he doesn't play great, he's banged up. Like I literally heard Jalen Brunson, right? We might get to in a minute. It's like, oh, his ankle's bothering him. That's why he played like garbage. And the next time he scores 44 points, nobody talks about it. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, oh, because he played bad, so now let's talk about his ankle. Like, no, let's talk about the fact that he played like garbage, missing 14 shots, right? If you're, you know what I'm saying? Like, your ankle doesn't make you miss 14 shots. Either, that's not all on the ankle and the turnovers and everything. He's been awful, and no one's gonna blame him for it. But again, that's what high expectations. If people were saying Luka's a top 20 player or a top 10 player in the NBA, and it's like, okay, maybe we'll give him some slack. When you're in that top 5 conversation, everything counts. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. If you're playing in the games, you have both legs, you didn't tear your Achilles, anything like that, you could be banged up. It's the playoffs. People are banged up. That's life.
Yeah, and you see this with...
Maybe that's a little harsh, but...
You see this as well. People put a lot of people in the top 5 and whatever, but you say this all the time. You could tell who people really think are on that level by the standards. Kevin Durant doesn't get no injury standard. If that guy goes for 51, 8, and 8 and misses 2 shots in overtime, he's getting roasted. LeBron James, before he got old, right? He's old now, and we can have a different conversation. LeBron in his prime, if he didn't do what you expect him to do, he got roasted. But Giannis and Luka and players like that, who people put in the top 5, they don't actually get held to that standard. So I think you really see by the conversation around, when we blame them or not, is really how you tell what people really think about the level of the player.
Yeah, and at this point in their careers, Kevin Durant and LeBron
are
not there.
Prime.
But
yeah, we're talking about prime.
In their primes, right? Exactly. Just to clarify that. And then Giannis is the other thing. We'll talk about Giannis a different day, but he just gets unlimited passes. Once you win a ring, you just get unlimited passes. So that is what it is, and we'll get into that a different day. But let's get into OKC. And we talked about this before the playoffs. You have Shea, who's your MVP level player, and I think he's been playing really, really well. He hasn't had necessarily those massive pop games like a 45-point game like Anthony Edwards has, but he's been consistent, Ben. You like that consistency. It's been that 30 points pretty much every night, just like the regular season. He didn't have so many crazy 50-point games. I don't think he had a 50-point game, but it's just consistently 30, 32, 31, 35. You know what I'm saying? That's what you want out of your playoffs. Your superstar in the playoffs, especially when your team that's a good defensive team. You don't necessarily have to score 120 points a game. This game they scored 100 points. We're able to win, and that's their defense is translated. But the big disappointment, despite this win, Jalen Williams, we talked about that. If OKC was going to get to that next level and prove that they were a legitimate championship contender, Jalen Williams has to be a legitimate second option, and he's been so disappointing in this playoffs. He's in that most improved conversation throughout the season. But this game, 5 for 19, 14 points. It's just awful. OKC kind of has that problem of Minnesota where they just don't quite have enough offense, but they just have a little bit more. Chet can chip in, give you 18, 17 points. Jalen Williams can give you 15 or so points, and down the line. But, it was a must-win game on the road. Shea stepped up to the plate, and that was impressive. And we'll see how they finish out this series.
Yeah, first takeaway, like I kind of mentioned on the Mavs side of it, kind of the reverse. Extremely impressed with their ability to fight through at the end of the game and kind of fight through, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, adversity or it's not really adversity. It's not really the word I'm looking for, but they were down, and every time they answered, the Mavs answered back. Offense was tough to come by, and they fought and fought and fought, and they broke through. They didn't give up, which it's a playoff game. You're not going to give up. But I was very impressed they were able to get over that hump. And now I think moving forward to the next three games, I don't want to overreact, but in a close game like that, they're not going to be afraid. It's going to be an even fight, and it's going to be a make or miss thing. It's not really going to be a mental thing. And then the other thing I'll touch on is kind of with the offense. I don't know if they have more than the Timberwolves. It's just OKC's playing the Mavericks, and the Timberwolves are playing, Denver. I would say that's more of the difference as opposed to who has more or less offensively.
Yeah, and we'll touch on this come off season time, whenever OKC gets eliminated or if they win the title. I would be a little bit surprised, but you never know. Um, Sam Presti, ever since the Kevin Durant days, he just loves picks. Sam Presti goes to bed at night and he dreams about how many draft picks can he add to his collection, and he never uses them. And I think this team is clearly a step away from a real title contention, in my opinion. And you have so many picks that you can trade 5 picks and go get a star player, or 4 picks and go get a star player, and you'll still have a billion picks. So Sam Presti, stop hoarding picks and go make a move this offseason. That's my challenge to Sam Presti.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you always got to listen. I definitely make the move, 100%. They need a move, right? They don't have, but you got to be careful who you bring. I don't think you can just plug in any one B or B level superstar who, and just I don't know if that gets them over the hump. So you got to be, or just a guard. I mean, a Donovan Mitchell might be a good move for them, but you got to be
No, I don't think
careful
that makes sense.
who it is that you bring. Yeah, that is that guy.
Yeah, 100%. It's been thrown around. Lauri Markkanen.
That's not doing it.
Go
Lauri
offer
Markkanen for me is not doing it.
go offer 7 first-round picks for Embiid. Force Daryl Morey to say no. But whatever. That'll be for the offseason. I think the next thing we're going to get into is the NBA draft lottery, a massive surprise. And just to foreshadow a little bit, we're talking about one team. The rest of it, who cares? This draft is kind of weak. I just think it's interesting. We have a resident Hawks fan here. The Hawks had a 3% chance to win the lottery, and they win it for the first time. I don't know, maybe it was since the 80s or ever. I don't remember exactly what it was. The first time ever. So there you go. It's typical Hawks luck that they win it in one of the worst draft classes ever. I've heard people say that it's like the class starts at 7 or 8. But I'm going to give a little breakdown, and then Ben's going to go deeper into it, of what the Hawks should do in the offseason. This is a big offseason for them. They have Trey, they have DeJounte, they have Jalen Johnson. Now they have this number 1 pick. They have the potential, to shape up their future in a really nice way, depending on which direction they go. But again, you kind of have to pick a direction. It can't just be, well, we'll just run it back in the same team and add Alex Sarr. I don't think that makes any sense. You got young players, you got old players. You won 36 games last year. A rookie is not going to be the difference. But also, I just want to touch on Alex Sarr. I know, I'm not an NBA scout, okay, but NBA scouts have been wrong enough that my opinion is valid too. From what I've seen of this Alex Sarr prospect, is that if he hits, he'll be a caliber of a number 1 overall pick in any draft. I don't think it's like, oh, if Alex Sarr hits, he'll be some mediocre, Derek Lively. I just don't see it. He's 7'1". He moves really well for that size. I don't know if the 3-point shot's going to be a thing or not. We'll see. That's something that usually develops over time. But at minimum, how is he not going to be an all NBA level defensive player? He's long, he's athletic, he moves well. He's young, he has room to grow. I think at minimum, he's just like a really good starting center who's fighting for all defensive teams for the next 5-10 years, whatever it is. People know better than me. I'm not analyzing film or whatever it is, but he seems like a very good prospect with potential. Obviously, you don't know if everything hits. But just a quick overview of what I think the Hawks should do. You have to choose between Trey and DeJounte. DeJounte, goodbye. Get out of here, okay? Go get 2 first-round picks for DeJounte. I would move Capella, especially because you're bringing in Sarr at the center, and maybe you get a couple of second-round picks from there and see how it goes. You got the Kings pick next year. But Ben, why don't you go into a deeper breakdown of the Hawks' future and their possibilities of what they can do?
Yeah, I mean the Hawks are in an interesting spot. They've got Trey DeJounte, and then they've kind of got 4 or 5 guys that are like good players, but they're each getting paid 20 million, and none of them on their own are making a difference for you. They at this point this year they're so far over the cap. They're like 60 million over the cap, even though they're not in the tax. They're right at the tax line. They're in the gap between the tax line and the cap. So they're way over the tax. They're way over the cap, excuse me, right under the tax. So even if they dump 3 or 4 of these players, they're not going to have cap space. So that's kind of a challenge for them. The issue, it makes a lot of sense to me that you want to dump, DeJounte, that's 2 first-round picks. Bogey, that's a first-round pick. And then Hunter, who's under contract for 3 years, you just give him away in the John Collins style for free, and you just get him off your books for the next, not this year, doesn't really matter, but in years 2 and 3 of that. And then, when you kind of skip this year, and then you come back next year because of those trades, and you've got 4 first-round picks in cap space. So that's the ideal situation. Plus, you got to play all your young guys. They've got some young, talented players who haven't gotten minutes, and if you don't get minutes, you can't develop. Jalen Johnson, Kobe Buffkin, AJ Griffin had a great rookie year and did nothing. He had a lot of off-court issues. So you give him minutes and you see if he's got anything. Vit Krejci also showed a flash for a couple months of being a great shooter. You see, they get an opportunity to play a lot of their young guys with talent and see which ones can stick a little bit this season. But that's not if run it with the young guys this year and Trae Young, and then come back next year. You can pick up a superstar with a couple of young players that develop, Jalen Johnson and Sarr, and then you have a real team. The issue is in the real world, can you will Trae Young be willing to take a year off and then come back next year and then for that opportunity? And even if he says it, I'm not calling him a liar. I'm saying any human being, just because you agree to it now, you're going to feel differently in a year. And that's very risky in terms of Trae Young, asking out. You're walking a fine line there. So really, you need to go in on this year in some amount. The issue is even if they're going to agree, right? We can't trust Trae Young that he's not going to want to ask out at some point, and we need to go in on this year, right? The Hawks management wants to do that. I don't see the path for them to go in and get more talent on the roster for this season. They're right at the tax. Their owner is super cheap, has never shown any indication that he'll pay the tax, and the Hawks haven't been very good. So I see no indication they're going to pay the tax, and they have no cap space. So the only path to getting talent this year is instead of trading some of these players for picks, you have to trade them for like veteran players who are ready. So the big one is obviously DeJounte. I don't know, whatever, maybe Brandon Ingram, or you'll see something like that. So that's kind of the path, is instead of trading for picks, you trade for veteran players. So I think that's what we'll see them do. Or we'll see them try to punt, but disguise it and see if they can trick Trae Young.
Trick Trae Young. Yeah, they're in an interesting spot for sure. The other thing is, like, it doesn't really make sense for them. Like, everyone's like, trade Trae Young and start all over. It's like you don't have your own picks. San Antonio has them, a couple of them at least. So that doesn't really make any sense. Also, the value that I've seen for Trae Young, mini rant here, it's just egregious. It's like, can we offer a bag of peanuts and a second round pick, and we'll throw in some 2028 first round pick that's lottery protected, and let's get Trae Young. It's like, who do you think this guy is? He's a top 25 player and minimum. People forget because the team hasn't had success in the recent years and they view that one playoff run as a fluke. Outside of this year, since his rookie year, the past 3-4 years, he's been in the playoffs. He's carried garbage cans. He had that one year, the Eastern Conference Finals. The other years against the Celtics last year, everyone, they were down 3-1 and they're down 2 points. He hits a go-ahead three-pointer to force Game 6. They didn't win it, but they took 2 games against the Celtics. He's just an offensive engine. He's a walking top 10 offense, and the disrespect, if that's what his trademark it is, I mean, you see like, oh, it's like Austin Reeves and a first round pick. It's like, it's a joke. If the Hawks were ever to entertain trading Trae Young, you'd have to get a 4 first round pick plus a young player with potential, minimum for me to consider trade Trae Young. But I just wouldn't do it because you don't have your pick. It doesn't make sense to rebuild. So I think it makes sense to trade DeJounte. We'll have to see if Mr. Red Glasses can figure out how to coach a basketball team because he gets a lot of credit for some reason when he hasn't really done anything. But they're going to be an interesting team next year. I think Trae Young wants to win now. The NBA media wants them to trade Trae Young so badly, especially to the Lakers. That's the other thing. Ben talks about this all the time. It's like everyone thinks Trae Young is garbage until it's like, oh, let's trade him to their team, and it's like, okay, now that everyone wants him. So it kind of is what it is. I mean, I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast the other day, and some of the trades. I mean, Bill Simmons is so low on Trae Young, it's ridiculous. And some of the trades that they're throwing out, and they're throwing out that Trae Young makes his teammates worse. Which teammates? John Collins was a 20-10 guy, and now nobody. What has he done on the Jazz? Nobody even knows who the guy is anymore. Clint Capella, he spoon feeds him every single shot attempt. Same thing with the Kongwu. Bogey has been really good with the Hawks. Which players left the Hawks and played better? I guess people say DeJounte came and played worse, but it's just not a good fit when you have two guards. We see that in Cleveland with Donovan Mitchell and Garland. Two lead guards just doesn't make any sense, and that's not how you optimize them. So that's not a Trae Young thing. It's just one player can have the ball at a time, and DeJounte can't really play off the ball, and Trae doesn't really play off the ball. But a team like the Magic should love to trade for Trae. They need that offensive engine, and they can support him defensively. San Antonio with Wemby, that would be so scary. People would realize how good Trae Young is if he got traded to San Antonio. How many spoon-fed buckets Wemby would get? It would be unbelievable. But yeah, Trae Young is definitely one of the most disrespected stars in the NBA, and I hope he doesn't get traded. But if he did get traded, I hope it's to a situation where people start recognizing how good the guy is.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we'll have plenty of opportunities to have this conversation. I don't need to go on I think that's pretty well said. Um, yeah, I mean, if you see him on the Lakers, I would see that being a great fit. The Lakers don't have any picks. They don't have enough assets to give us back. But I think that would work really well with the two giants of LeBron and Anthony Davis. And yeah, and the Spurs, that would be phenomenal. You get traded to the Spurs, I would have my Spurs jersey on Fanatics order. Since Fanatics takes 6 to 8 weeks for it to ship, I wouldn't get it for a while, but it will be on order day of trade. Um, so yeah, walking top 10 offense. Back in those playoffs, he was putting up 40 points and 9 assists. I don't know if people think he got worse since then. I like against very good teams. Like I'm excited, and you know what? The Alex Sarr, Jalen Johnson, that's a perfect fit with Trae Young. You probably want to have a point of attack defender in there, and then that point of attack. You need an Anunoby in there, trigger shooter plus stopper in there. But that's the lineup that worked back when Prime Capella was cleaning up their whole defense. So like there's a path for this to work, but we'll see.
All right, let's touch on the other two playoff series just for a moment. We had Knicks Pacers last night. The Knicks won a critical game 5. They got wrecked in game 4, and then they blow out the Pacers in game 5. That's how the playoffs works. Games don't carry over. If you ask my opinion, I would take the Pacers in game 6. Their home court is unbelievable. And I get Jalen Brunson's ankle tends to hurt when he plays in the Pacers arena. I guess it doesn't hurt so much at home. But that is what it is. He had another monster performance. He's been phenomenal this playoffs, outside of a couple games in this series. I still don't love the play style that he has, and I still don't think they have enough offense to beat a team like Boston. But do you have any takeaways from this game, or should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any. Either team could win the series. Most of the games have been close. Each team has demonstrated they can win. So we'll see who wins. I will give both teams a 0% chance to beat Boston. I think Boston. I mean, I don't know if we're gonna get to Boston, but whatever they get. Yeah.
Let's touch on Boston quickly.
Okay. Yeah. So I still think this is shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic this series, but either team can win. Brunson is in a whole nother league of player from Halliburton. That's kind of what I got.
Yeah, let's move on to Celtics really quick. Donovan Mitchell did not play in game 4, and the Celtics won accordingly. It was actually pretty close for most of the game. Darius Garland looked a lot better without Mitchell, surprisingly, because it just, ironically, if you can't catch my sarcasm, because two lead guards doesn't make any sense, and it never has, and teams will keep trying it, and it just doesn't work. So hopefully that era of basketball ends soon. But Darius Garland is an elite player, and I think if the Cavs have to trade Mitchell this offseason, then if they got a piece that's more like a wing piece, people saying LeBron was at the game. Is LeBron going to go back to Cleveland? Whatever it is, they need a wing piece, and I think that would fit their team a lot better. I think you optimize Darius Garland with the ball in his hands, and we'll see if Donovan Mitchell comes back for Game 5. If he does, I'll give them a shot. Just because the Celtics, I'm so unimpressed with the Celtics. I really am. This is we talked about this, but this is the easiest finals run ever, probably. And then I think they'll get handled relatively easily in the finals, unless Dallas somehow manages to get to the finals, which I don't think is happening. So, but do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. First of all, with the players showing up to games, I don't think that means anything. We saw Tyrese Maxey at one of the games, and there's been a couple other players. If I was an NBA player, a max NBA player with 45 million annually, and I would love to go watch, kind of my peers play basketball. Like I think of just leagues I've been in myself. Like I like to watch other guys I know play the sport I play. Like I would love to be at the game if I could, and sit in the front row. I can afford to do that. So I don't really think that means much. Um, and then yeah, Boston hasn't been. I mean, they've taken care of business, but barely. And these aren't great teams. So yeah, I definitely them against the Nuggets, absolutely no shot. If it was, and I would say if Minnesota, beat Denver and made it there, I would say absolutely no shot. They would show they had that level of backbone if they made it there. And then the Mavs Thunder, I think that would be a good match, a potential win for the Celtics. 50-50 with those two teams. But yeah, very easy path. Maybe one of the LeBron paths. You reference a lot. Maybe would be in that conversation with the Raptors. Um, Conversation for another day. The interesting thing I saw from this game, just a little nugget. Jason Tatum has gotten roasted for this playoffs and kind of in general that he's never able to take that next step and isn't able to impose his will, when he wants to, and whatever certain limitations he has despite his basically looking like a wing made in a lab. But in this game, he got a technical foul at one point in the game, and he got very angry. He was upset. He's very calm and cerebral. On the court, you can see it in the press conferences, the way he talks. He's very calm. He was angry for this tech, and you saw for the next minute and a half, 90 seconds of basketball, he played like you would imagine his physical capabilities are. He's like guarding a guy in the corner, and he just flies out, to like basically the wing, steals it, and like gets a dunk, or might have even call it whatever. Sorry, no, I'll just finish this. He got angry for a second, and he played like you would imagine he would be able to play like. And so, that kind of makes you, whatever, another indication that some of his hurdles to get over are mental. And, it just he doesn't seem to have that extra, he doesn't seem to be mad. Like, he's like kind of content. And that kind of holds him back. Not like it's a terrible trait. It is what it is. But it was cool to see for that short burst, like, oh my gosh. But I don't think we're going to see that again or with any level of consistency.
Yeah, it's just the consistency. We've seen big moments. He was down 3-2 against Giannis, went to Giannis's house and scored like 45 points and won that game. And ended up winning the series. And then he had another game 7 where he had 50 points. He has moments. It's not consistent enough, and we'll see what it is in the future. Quick question: next 5 years, Anthony Edwards, Jason Tatum. Is it who you
No,
taking?
Anthony
Is it
Edwards
close?
not close. Not close. Anthony Edwards, without a doubt. That's not even close.
Okay. All right. Well, let's close with that. The next podcast probably come out, maybe record Sunday, so maybe Sunday night or Monday night. Maybe the Wolves will be eliminated by then. Maybe the Mavs will be eliminated by then. Maybe the Pacers will be eliminated by then. We'll have to see. But that was a good episode, and we'll catch you guys on the next
Peace.
one.